My husband said I embarrassed him by being too emotional at his father's wake. Then his brother pulled me aside and said he'd been complaining about having to bring me at all. I stood there in the funeral home bathroom, clutching the edge of the sink, trying to process what Griffin had just told me. Your brother said what? Griffin looked uncomfortable. He shifted his weight, not meeting my eyes. I shouldn't have said anything, but I thought you should know. Nathan's been telling everyone you're making a scene, that you barely knew Dad and you're crying more than the actual family. I'd cried during the eulogy when they mentioned how much my father-in-law loved his garden, how he'd spent every morning tending his roses, talking to them like old friends. Nathan had seen me wipe my eyes and apparently decided that was too much. I went back out to the reception, watching my husband across the room. He was laughing with his cousins, a beer in hand, looking completely at ease. Not like someone who'd lost his father 4 days ago. Not like someone married to the woman currently being discussed as the emotional train wreck of the evening. When we got home that night, I asked him directly, "Did you tell people I embarrassed you today?" He didn't even look up from his phone. "You were a bit much, don't you think?" "A bit much." I'd hugged his mother. I'd cried quietly during one speech. I'd helped serve coffee to elderly relatives. "A bit much," I repeated slowly. "Nathan, your father died." "Yeah, and you acted like he was your father," he snapped. "You met him maybe 15 times. Some of us knew him our whole lives and managed to keep it together." The next morning, I started paying attention to things I'd ignored for years. How Nathan never wanted me at his family events. How he'd make excuses when his mother invited us to dinner. How he'd claimed his brother's wedding was adults only. Then I saw the photos filled with children. I texted Griffin, "Can we talk?" He called me within minutes. His voice was cautious but kind. "I've wanted to say something for a while," he admitted. "Nathan's been doing this since you got married. He tells Mom you're always busy. He tells us you don't like spending time with the family. But I love spending time with you all," I said, my voice breaking. "I know," Griffin said quietly. "We all know." That's why I finally said something. I thought about every missed birthday, every holiday Nathan attended alone while claiming I had work or wasn't feeling well. I remembered his mother's hurt expression last Christmas when I showed up unexpected. How she'd said, "We didn't think you were coming. Nathan said you had the flu." I'd been perfectly healthy, sitting at home wondering why he left without me. I called my sister that afternoon. She'd never liked Nathan. When I told her everything, she went silent for a long moment. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. "Do you remember your Thanksgiving ago when Nathan said you wanted to stay home but he'd go see his family? I found receipts in his jacket pocket last week while you were staying with me. Hotel receipts. Different hotels over the past 6 months. All in our hometown, all on weekends he claimed he was visiting his family alone." My hands started shaking. I hung up and opened our laptop, something I never did because Nathan always said I should respect his privacy. His email was already logged in. I found confirmations for hotel stays, dinner reservations for 2 at expensive restaurants on nights he'd supposedly eaten with his mother, and messages. So many messages. With someone named Bridget, talking about how much easier everything would be once he finally left his wife, how they could stop hiding, how his family already loved her because she actually fit in, unlike the outsider he'd made the mistake of marrying. The bathroom door opened. Nathan stood there, his face going pale when he saw me at the computer. "What are you doing?" he said, his voice flat and dangerous. I turned the laptop screen toward him. The email thread with Bridget was still open, her latest message from that morning saying she couldn't wait to see him this weekend, that she'd already bought the lingerie he liked, that his mother had invited her to Sunday dinner again, and she was excited to spend more time with his family. I waited for him to deny it, to scramble for an explanation, to at least pretend he was sorry. Instead, he closed the laptop carefully and sat down on the edge of the bed. "How long have you known?" he asked. Like this was a business transaction we were negotiating. Like I was the one who'd done something wrong by finding out. "Since about 20 minutes ago," I said. My voice sounded strange, too calm. "How long have you been sleeping with her?" He rubbed his face. 2 years, maybe longer. I don't know. Does it matter? 2 years. I tried to do the math. That was before his father got sick, before we'd talked about starting a family, before I turned down a job offer in another state because Nathan said he couldn't leave his family. "Does your family know?" I asked. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something close to pity in his eyes. "They've known for over a year. Mom keeps inviting Bridget to things hoping you two will eventually meet, and I'll just tell you the truth. She thinks I'm cruel for dragging this out." Griffin shifted uncomfortably. "He's been trying to get me to tell you since Dad's diagnosis. Said Dad wouldn't want this hanging over the family." I felt like I was underwater, hearing everything through thick glass. "Your mother knows. Your brother knows. Your dying father knew. Everyone knew except me." Nathan shrugged. "You never asked the right questions. You just believed whatever I told you. It was easier that way." I thought about all the times I'd defended him to my sister, how I'd insisted he loved me even when she pointed out how strange his behavior was, how I'd made excuses for every missed dinner, every solo family event, every time he'd made me feel like I was too much, too emotional, too difficult to bring around normal people. "I need you to leave," I said. He stood up, grabbed his keys from the dresser. "I'm going to Bridget's. We can talk when you're ready to be reasonable about this." "Reasonable," I repeated. He paused at the door. "Look, we can figure out the divorce stuff later. I'll have my lawyer call you." He just walked out, like it was that simple. Like he hadn't just blown up my entire life while acting like I was the inconvenience. I sat there for 2 hours, staring at the wall. Then I called Griffin back. I told him everything. When I finished, he was quiet for so long I thought he'd hung up. Finally, he said, "I'm coming over." "No," I said, "but I need to know something." "Did your father know?" Griffin sighed. "Yes, he knew. We all begged Nathan to end it or tell you. Dad especially. He really liked you. Said you had more spine than Nathan deserved. He wanted to tell you himself, but Nathan convinced him it wasn't his place. That broke something in me. My father-in-law had spent his last months watching his son betray me, wanting to warn me, but staying silent out of respect for family loyalty. And I'd cried at his funeral because he'd been kind to me, one of the few members of Nathan's family who'd made me feel welcome. Nathan had used that against me, had told everyone I was being dramatic, had complained about having to bring me at all. I started packing that night. Every box I filled, I found more evidence of Nathan's double life. Concert tickets for shows he'd told me were work events. Photos on his phone he'd forgotten to delete. Bridget wearing the necklace I'd thought he'd bought for me last Christmas. A spare key labeled B's Place in his sock drawer. I loaded everything I owned into my car. It wasn't much. Nathan had always managed our money, and I'd let him because he insisted he was better at it. Now I wondered how much he'd been spending on her. My sister arrived at dawn. She took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug. I didn't cry. I felt empty, scraped out from the inside. "We're going to Mom and Dad's," she said firmly. "You're going to stay there until we figure this out." I followed her out to her car, leaving my keys on the kitchen counter. Let Nathan come home to an empty apartment and wonder where I'd gone. Let him feel uncertain for once. My parents were horrified. Dad wanted to drive to Bridget's place and confront Nathan immediately. Mom just held my hand and kept saying she'd never trusted him, which wasn't helpful but felt validating anyway. I spent that first day in my childhood bedroom, staring at posters I'd hung in high school, feeling like I'd time-traveled backward into a person I'd stopped being years ago. Griffin called that evening. "Nathan came home to find you gone. He's calling your phone nonstop. I'd turned it off hours ago. Tell him I'll contact him through a lawyer," I said. There was a pause. "He's furious. Says you're overreacting, that plenty of people have affairs and work through it, that you're making this harder than it needs to be." Of course he was. I was supposed to accept this quietly, reasonably, like a good wife who understood she'd never been enough anyway. I found a lawyer the next day. Her name was Patricia, and she had silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She listened to my story without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "Do you have evidence of the affair?" I showed her the emails, the hotel receipts, the photos. She smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "This is going to be very straightforward. Illinois is technically a no-fault divorce state, but evidence of infidelity can impact property division and spousal support, especially since he's been using marital funds to support this relationship." "Marital funds?" I repeated. She pulled out a legal pad. "Everything earned during the marriage is marital property. That includes his salary, bonuses, and any assets acquired. If he's been spending significant money on hotels, gifts, and dinners for his girlfriend, that's dissipation of marital assets. We can absolutely use that." For the first time since finding those emails, I felt something other than numb devastation. I felt angry. Patricia filed the papers that week. Nathan was served at work, which apparently embarrassed him in front of his colleagues. He called me 32 times that day, leaving increasingly hostile voicemails about how I was ruining his reputation. His reputation. The man who'd been lying to everyone for years was worried about his reputation. I finally called him back. "Stop calling me," I said. "Talk to my lawyer. But we need to discuss this," he insisted. "There's nothing to discuss. You've been cheating on me for 2 years. Your whole family knew. You used marital money to fund it. We're done." He shifted tactics then, his voice softening. "I made mistakes, okay? But we can fix this. Couples therapy, whatever you want." I thought about the emails. The ones where he called me frigid, boring, an obligation he had to maintain, where he and Bridget laughed about how clueless I was, how he said he only stayed because divorce would hurt his image at work and his mother would be upset. "No," I said. "We can't fix this. I don't want to fix this." The next few weeks were brutal. Nathan fought everything. He claimed the hotel stays were for work, that the receipts were from business dinners, that Bridget was just a friend from college, and I was reading too much into friendly emails. Patricia tore apart every lie with documentation, hotel records that showed no conferences on those dates, receipts from romantic restaurants 100 miles from his office, emails that were explicitly sexual and talked about their future together. His mother called me. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Honey," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry. I should have told you. I wanted to tell you. I felt Nathan put us in an impossible position, but that's no excuse." I was silent, not trusting myself to speak. "Griffin told me what Nathan said about the wake," she continued, "about complaining about bringing you. I want you to know that's not how we feel. We love you. We're ashamed of what our son has done." It was too late for that, but I appreciated it anyway. "Thank you," I managed. "When this is over," she said quietly, "I hope you'll still visit sometimes. You're still family to us, even if Nathan doesn't deserve you." We hung up, and I cried for the first time since leaving. Not for Nathan or our marriage, but for the family I'd lost. For Griffin and his wife and their kids who I'd grown to love. For Nathan's mother who'd shown me old photo albums and taught me her recipes. For the life I'd thought I was building. My sister found me on the back porch, staring at nothing. She sat down beside me. "You're going to get through this," she said. "I know," I replied. And I did know. But knowing didn't make it hurt less. The divorce proceedings dragged on for months. Nathan's lawyer tried to paint me as vindictive and unreasonable. Patricia destroyed them in every hearing. She presented evidence of over $40,000 in marital funds spent on the affair. Hotel rooms, jewelry, dinners, weekend trips. Nathan had even rented Bridget an apartment for 8 months, paying for it out of our joint account while telling me we needed to cut back on expenses. The judge was not sympathetic. He ordered Nathan to pay me back for half of all dissipated marital assets. He granted me spousal support for 2 years while I got back on my feet, since I'd given up career opportunities to accommodate Nathan's job. He awarded me half of Nathan's retirement account and our savings. Nathan's face went red when the judge read the decision. He stood up, started to argue. His lawyer pulled him back down, but the damage was done. The judge added another 6 months to the spousal support for contempt of court. Outside the courthouse, Nathan tried to corner me. "This is insane," he hissed. "You're taking everything." I looked at him. This man I'd loved, who I'd built my life around. "I'm taking what I'm entitled to," I said calmly. "You spent years lying to me, humiliating me, and using our money to fund your affair. This is just the consequences of your choices." "But Bridget," he started. I held up my hand. "I don't care about Bridget. I don't care about you. I just want to never see you again." Griffin was waiting by my car. He pulled me into a hug. "I'm proud of you," he said. "Dad would be proud of you too." We'd been talking regularly through everything. He and his wife had made it clear they were on my side, despite the awkwardness of being Nathan's brother. Their kids still called me aunt and sent me drawings. It helped, having them in my corner. I moved into a small apartment downtown. It was tiny compared to the place Nathan and I had shared, but it was mine. I painted the walls myself, bought furniture I actually liked instead of the modern minimalist stuff Nathan had insisted on, hung photos of my family and friends, including several of Griffin's kids, started rebuilding my life piece by piece. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I ran into Bridget at a coffee shop. She looked tired, older than I'd expected. There was an awkward moment where we both recognized each other. Then she approached my table. "Can I sit?" she asked. I considered saying no, but curiosity won. She sat down, gripping her coffee cup like a lifeline. "I wanted to apologize," she said, "for what I did, for my part in hurting you." I waited, saying nothing. She continued, her voice shaky. "Nathan told me you two were separated when we started, that you were just staying together for financial reasons until you could afford to divorce, that you'd even started seeing other people. I didn't find out the truth until after you left, until his mother told me what he'd really been doing. I felt nothing hearing this. No anger, no vindication, just tired. He lied to both of us," I said. She nodded, tears in her eyes. "He's been lying to me too, about his finances, about the divorce settlement. He told me the judge was biased against men and took everything from him, but I saw the actual documents when I was cleaning his office. He was spending money he claimed he didn't have. Taking me on trips he said were comped by work. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "He's your problem now," I said, not unkindly. She looked at me then, really looked at me. "I think I made a terrible mistake," she whispered. "He's not who I thought he was." I stood up, gathering my things. "That makes 2 of us." I walked out without looking back. Whatever happened between Nathan and Bridget now wasn't my concern. I'd wasted enough time on him. My career started picking up. I'd gone back to school part-time, using the spousal support to cover tuition. I was studying business management, something I'd wanted to do before Nathan convinced me his career should take priority. My professors liked my work. I landed an internship at a marketing firm that turned into a job offer. My sister threw me a party to celebrate, inviting everyone who'd supported me through the divorce. Griffin and his family came. Even Nathan's mother showed up, bringing a casserole and a card that made me cry. On the 1-year anniversary of finding those emails, I went to my father-in-law's grave. I'd been avoiding it, not sure what I'd feel. But that day, I drove to the cemetery and found his headstone. Someone had planted roses around it. His wife, probably. Remembering how much he'd loved his garden. "I'm doing okay," I told him. "Better than okay, actually. I wish you told me what Nathan was doing, but I understand why you didn't. I hope you'd still be proud of me anyway." The wind picked up, rustling through the trees. I stayed there for an hour, talking to him about my new job, my classes, the life I was building. It felt peaceful, final, like I was closing a chapter I'd been stuck in too long. When I stood to leave, I noticed someone had left fresh flowers on the grave that morning. A card attached read, "You deserved better than the family you got, but we're grateful you were part of ours anyway." It was signed by Griffin. I called him from my car. "Thank you," I said when he answered, "for the flowers, for everything. You were there for me when your own brother wasn't." He was quiet for a moment. "Your family," he said simply. "That doesn't change just because Nathan's an idiot. His kids are asking when you're coming to visit again. They miss their aunt. I promised I'd come by that weekend." 2 years after the divorce, I met someone. His name was Felix, and he was nothing like Nathan. He asked questions and listened to the answers. He encouraged my career instead of diminishing it. He introduced me to his family immediately, no secret meetings or excuses. When I told him about Nathan, he just held my hand and said, "His loss, our gain." It was simple, uncomplicated, exactly what I needed. Felix proposed on a Tuesday afternoon in my tiny apartment. No fancy restaurant, no elaborate plan, just us on the couch after work, and him saying he couldn't imagine his life without me in it anymore. I said yes without hesitation. We got married at the courthouse 6 months later, with my family, his family, and Griffin's family in attendance. Nathan's mother sent a gift and a card saying she couldn't attend because it would hurt Nathan's feelings, but she was happy for me. I understood. Griffin pulled me aside at the small reception at my parents' house. "Dad would have loved this," he said, gesturing around the room. "He always said you'd land on your feet, just wished he could have seen it." I wished that too. But I was grateful for the family I'd kept, the ones who'd chosen me even when it cost them something. Nathan reached out 5 years after our divorce. A Facebook message late at night, clearly drunk. He said he'd made mistakes. That Bridget had left him after discovering he'd been lying to her the same way he'd lied to me. That he'd lost his job due to poor performance reviews. That his mother barely spoke to him anymore. that he was sorry, that he wondered if we could talk, maybe try again. I read it twice. Then I blocked him without responding. Felix noticed my expression. "Everything okay?" he asked. I smiled at him, this good man who'd shown me what healthy love actually looked like. "Everything's perfect," I said, and I meant it. I'd spent too many years of my life letting Nathan make me doubt myself, making me feel like my emotions were too much. My presence was an embarrassment. I wasn't going to give him another second of my peace. Griffin called a few days later. "Nathan told Mom he tried to contact you. Apparently, he's been telling people you're the one who got away and he never should have let you go." I laughed, genuinely amused. "He didn't let me go. I left. After I found out he'd been cheating on me with someone your whole family knew about." Griffin laughed too. "That's what I told him." Mom told him the same thing. "He's rewriting history to make himself the victim." It's pathetic. I felt nothing for Nathan anymore. Not anger, not satisfaction at his struggles, not even pity. He was just someone I used to know, someone who'd taught me what I wouldn't accept in my life anymore. The woman who'd stood in that funeral home bathroom, hearing her husband had complained about bringing her, felt like a stranger to me now. That woman had believed she was too much. This woman knew she'd never been the problem. Felix and I bought a house that spring. Nothing fancy, but it had a garden out back. I planted roses thinking about my father-in-law and his daily ritual of tending his flowers. Felix helped, even though he knew nothing about gardening. We figured it out together, learning as we went. That's how our whole relationship worked. Partnership, equality, actually giving a damn about each other's feelings. Nathan's mother came to visit once we were settled. She walked through the house, admiring the photos on the walls, the life I'd built. When we sat down for tea, she took my hands in hers. "I failed you," she said quietly. "I should have told you what Nathan was doing. I should have stood up to him, but I was a coward. I was afraid of losing my son, so I stayed silent while he destroyed his marriage." I squeezed her hands. "You couldn't have stopped him. He made his choices." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "But I could have given you the information to make yours sooner. I'm so sorry." We talked for hours that day. She told me Nathan had moved across the country, trying to start over somewhere no one knew his history, that he'd been engaged briefly, but the woman had left him when she discovered he was still telling lies about his ex-wife, painting me as the villain in his story, that Griffin had finally confronted him at Christmas, telling him to get therapy or stop coming around, that their family was fractured because of the choices he'd made and the lies he'd told. I felt sad for her, carrying the weight of her son's failures, but I also felt free. This wasn't my burden anymore. I'd built a new life, surrounded by people who valued me, who didn't make me feel like my emotions were too much or my presence was an inconvenience. People who showed up for me the way I showed up for them. Griffin's oldest daughter was my goddaughter now. His youngest had started calling Felix Uncle Felix without anyone telling her to. This was my family now. The last time I thought about that day at the wake was at my own father's funeral, 6 years after the divorce. I cried openly, holding my mother as we said goodbye to the man who'd taught me what real love looked like. Felix stood beside me, solid and steady. Griffin and his family came, supporting me through one of the hardest days of my life. Nathan's mother sent flowers and a card. As I stood at the reception afterward, helping my mother greet guests, I remembered Nathan's words, that I'd been too emotional, that I barely knew his father and had no right to cry. I thought about how he'd isolated me from his family, kept me away from the people who would have told me the truth, how he'd tried to make me believe my feelings were wrong, excessive, embarrassing. My mother squeezed my hand. "You okay, sweetheart?" I looked around the room. My sister was helping serve food. Felix was talking to my aunts and uncles, making them smile even in their grief. Griffin's kids were playing quietly in the corner, occasionally coming over for hugs. This was what family looked like. This was what love looked like. "I'm okay," I told my mother. I really am, and I was. But there were still moments when the past crept in, moments when I'd catch myself second-guessing my reactions, wondering if I was being too much. Felix noticed it one evening when I apologized for crying during a movie. He paused the TV and turned to face me. "You don't have to apologize for having feelings," he said gently. "That's not something that needs an apology." "I know," I said. "But sometimes I still hear Nathan's voice in my head, telling me I'm too emotional." Felix pulled me close. "Nathan was wrong about you. He was wrong about everything. You're not too much. You're exactly enough. And the fact that you feel things deeply is one of the things I love most about you." It took time, but slowly I started believing him. Started trusting that my emotions weren't a flaw to be managed, but part of who I was. That the right people wouldn't make me feel like I needed to diminish myself to be acceptable. Griffin and I stayed close over the years. His kids grew up calling me their aunt, never knowing there was a time when that title was connected to their Uncle Nathan. To them, I was just family. Griffin's wife told me once that their oldest daughter had written a school essay about important women in her life. I was one of them. She'd written about how I taught her that you could start over after bad things happened, that you could choose your family as much as your family chose you. That essay made me cry, the good kind of crying that Felix never made me apologize for. I'd never thought about what my story might mean to someone else, how my choices might give someone permission to make their own. Griffin's daughter was 16 now, the same age I'd been when I first started believing love meant making yourself smaller. I hoped she'd never learn that lesson. Hoped she'd grow up knowing her feelings were valid, her presence was wanted, her voice mattered. My career continued to grow. I became a manager at the marketing firm, then a director. I mentored younger women, especially ones who seemed to be shrinking themselves in meetings, apologizing before they spoke, qualifying every idea. I recognized that behavior because I'd lived it. I'd spent years with Nathan thinking if I could just be less, need less, feel less, then maybe I'd be enough for him. I'd been wrong. The problem was never that I was too much. The problem was that he was too little. I ran into Bridget one more time, years after that coffee shop encounter. She was at a professional conference I was speaking at. I was giving a talk on authentic leadership when I spotted her in the audience. After the presentation, she approached me cautiously. "That was really powerful," she said. "Thank you for sharing your story." I hadn't mentioned Nathan by name, but I'd talked about the cost of dimming your light for someone who should have celebrated it instead. We grabbed coffee afterward. She looked different, healthier, more present. She told me she'd left Nathan 2 years after I did, that the pattern had repeated itself with her, the lies and manipulation and isolation, that she'd finally understood what I'd tried to tell her in that first coffee shop. He wasn't capable of being honest with anyone, she said. Not you, not me, probably not himself. I'm sorry I didn't believe you then. I should have listened. I accepted her apology. We talked for over an hour about the experience of untangling yourself from someone who'd made you doubt your own reality, about rebuilding trust in your own judgment, about learning to recognize red flags you'd been trained to ignore. Before we parted, she asked if I'd stayed in touch with Griffin. I have, I said. He's family. She smiled sadly. Nathan hates that his family chose you over him. Good, I said, surprising myself. He should hate it. He earned it. That night, I told Felix about the encounter. He listened without interrupting, the way he always did. Do you ever regret it? He asked when I finished. The divorce, leaving, all of it? Never, I said immediately. Not even once. He nodded. Good, because that guy didn't deserve you. I kissed him then, grateful for this man who'd shown me what partnership actually meant, who'd never once made me feel like I needed to apologize for existing. We had children eventually. A daughter first, then a son. When my daughter was born, I held her in the hospital and made her a promise. I will never make you feel like you're too much, I whispered. Your feelings are valid. Your presence matters. You are enough exactly as you are. Felix stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder. She's lucky to have you as a mom, he said. I hoped so. I hoped I could give her what I'd spent years searching for, the certainty that she was wanted and valued and loved without conditions. Nathan's mother met our daughter when she was 6 months old. She came to visit, bringing gifts and tears. She looks like you, she said, holding my baby girl. Thank you for letting me be part of this. Thank you for not shutting me out. I could never shut you out, I said honestly. You're her grandmother. Blood doesn't erase that. She cried harder. This woman who'd failed me years ago but had spent every day since trying to make amends. Griffin came too, his kids excited to meet their new cousin. My daughter would grow up knowing this complicated blended family that had chosen each other. When my daughter was 4, she came home from preschool upset. A boy had told her she was too loud during playtime. I knelt down to her level. Were you being mean? I asked. She shook her head. I was just excited. We were playing superheroes and I was having fun. Then you weren't too loud, I said firmly. You were exactly as loud as someone having fun should be. Never let anyone make you feel bad for experiencing joy. She hugged me tight. Daddy says the same thing, she said. He tells me I'm perfect just how I am. My heart swelled. Felix had said that because he meant it. Because he'd never once tried to dim her light or mine. Because he understood that love meant celebrating people, not containing them. I thought about Nathan, about how he'd spent years trying to make me smaller, quieter, less present. How he'd complained about bringing me to his father's wake because my grief was inconvenient for his image. How wrong he'd been about everything that mattered. I started writing about my experience. Not for publication initially, just for myself. But my sister read what I'd written and encouraged me to share it. You'd be surprised how many women have lived versions of this story, she said. How many people need to hear that they're not crazy, that they're not too much, that the problem wasn't them. I published an essay online about emotional abuse and gaslighting and the slow erosion of self-worth. It went viral. Hundreds of women reached out to me, thousands. They shared their stories of partners who'd made them feel like their emotions were character flaws, who'd isolated them from family and friends, who'd rewritten history to make themselves the victims, who'd cheated and lied and then acted like the betrayed partner was the problem for being upset. Reading their messages, I felt less alone, and I hoped they felt less alone too. Patricia, my divorce lawyer, called me after the essay went viral. I've been practicing family law for 30 years, she said, and I've never seen anyone articulate this pattern as clearly as you did. Have you considered writing more? Maybe even a book? I hadn't, but the idea took root. I started writing in the evenings after my kids went to bed. Felix would bring me tea and kiss the top of my head, telling me he was proud of me. Griffin's wife sent me articles and research studies about emotional manipulation. Even Nathan's mother contributed, sharing her perspective on watching her son destroy his marriage and being too afraid to intervene. The book took 2 years to write. It wasn't just my story anymore. I interviewed dozens of women who'd experienced similar patterns. I talked to therapists and lawyers and researchers. I wanted to create something that would help people recognize these dynamics before they'd wasted as many years as I had. Something that would validate their experiences and give them permission to leave. When the book was published, Nathan somehow got a copy. He left a 1-star review online, claiming I'd exaggerated everything and painting myself as a victim for attention, that I'd been a difficult wife and he'd done his best, that our divorce had been mutual and amicable. Griffin saw the review and called me immediately. Do you want me to respond? He asked. His voice was tight with anger. I thought about it. Then I said no. Let him embarrass himself. Anyone who reads that review and then reads the book will see exactly who he is. I was right. Other reviewers tore Nathan's review apart. People who knew us both came forward to correct his lies. Even some of his old colleagues commented, sharing their own observations of his behavior. Nathan deleted the review within days, but screenshots lived forever. That's the thing about truth. It has a way of surfacing eventually. The book did well, better than I'd imagined. I started getting invited to speak at events, to share my story with audiences who understood. Women would come up to me afterward, crying, saying they felt seen for the first time, saying they thought they were crazy or too sensitive or fundamentally flawed, saying my story had given them permission to leave their own Nathans. Each conversation reminded me why I'd written it, why I'd chosen to be vulnerable and public about the worst period of my life. Felix worried sometimes that I was reopening old wounds, that talking about Nathan constantly would keep me stuck in the past. But it didn't feel that way to me. It felt like taking something painful and transforming it into something useful. Like my suffering could have meaning if it helped someone else suffer less. He came to one of my speaking events and heard me tell the story of finding the emails, of Nathan's family knowing, of being told I was too emotional at the wake. Afterward, he held me close. "I forget sometimes," he said quietly. "I forget how bad it was because you're so okay now. But hearing you tell it, I want to find him and make him understand what he did to you." I kissed him. "I'm glad you don't, though. I'm glad you're the kind of man who gets angry on my behalf, but doesn't need to act on it, who trusts that I've handled it in my own way. That's the difference between you and him. He never trusted me to know what I needed. You always have." We drove home that night in comfortable silence, my hand in his. This was what love looked like, what partnership felt like, what I'd been searching for during all those years with Nathan, not realizing I'd never find it with someone who fundamentally didn't respect me. My daughter started school and made friends easily. She was confident and outspoken, and never apologized for taking up space. One day she came home and announced she'd told a boy to stop interrupting her. "I was talking," she'd said, according to her teacher. "And it's rude to interrupt. Wait your turn." I praised her, told her I was proud of her for standing up for herself. She looked at me seriously. "You always tell me my voice matters," she said. So I used it. Simple as that. The lessons I'd learned too late, she was learning at 6. My son was quieter, more thoughtful. He felt things deeply, but expressed them differently than his sister. One night, he climbed into my lap, crying because he'd seen a sad movie. Felix's mother, visiting for dinner, made a comment about him being sensitive. I felt myself tense. "He has a tender heart," I said carefully. "That's a gift, not a flaw." She backtracked immediately, but the moment stayed with me. How easily people dismissed emotions, especially in boys. How young we started teaching children to suppress what they felt. I talked to my son later, after Felix's mother had gone home. "It's okay to cry," I told him. "It's okay to feel sad or scared or overwhelmed. Those feelings are part of being human. Some people think boys aren't supposed to show emotion, but that's not true. Feelings aren't weakness. They're how we know we're alive." He wiped his eyes. "Dad cries sometimes," he said. "I've seen him." I nodded. "Dad cries sometimes, and so do I, and so will you. That's okay. That's healthy." Nathan would have mocked him for crying, would have told him to toughen up, to stop being so sensitive, to act like a man. The thought made me sick. My son would never learn those lessons, never internalize that toxic masculinity that had shaped Nathan into someone incapable of emotional honesty. He'd grow up knowing feelings were safe, that vulnerability was strength, that expressing emotion didn't diminish him, and maybe he'd become the kind of man who'd never make a partner feel too emotional for having human reactions. Years passed. My children grew. My career flourished. Felix and I celebrated anniversaries, took family vacations, built a life that felt solid and real. I'd speak at events occasionally, do interviews about the book, connect with women still untangling themselves from similar situations. But mostly, I just lived. I gardened and cooked and went to my kids' school events and had dinner with my parents and sister. I visited Griffin's family and maintained my relationship with Nathan's mother, who'd become a loving grandmother to my children. Nathan existed somewhere in my past, a cautionary tale I occasionally referenced but rarely thought about. Griffin would update me sometimes. Nathan had remarried and divorced again. Nathan had lost another job. Nathan had finally started therapy, but quit after the therapist suggested he needed to take accountability for his patterns. Nathan was exactly who he'd always been, just with different victims now. I felt nothing hearing these updates. No satisfaction, no vindication, no curiosity about his life. He was irrelevant to me. The woman who'd loved him felt like someone I'd known a long time ago, someone I barely recognized now. That woman had believed love meant sacrifice and silence and making yourself small. This woman knew better. This woman had learned that real love expanded you, celebrated you, made you more yourself rather than less. On what would have been our 15th wedding anniversary, Felix found me in the garden. I wasn't thinking about Nathan. I was thinking about the roses I'd planted, about my father-in-law who'd loved them, about how grief and growth were sometimes intertwined in ways you didn't expect. Felix sat beside me. "You okay?" he asked. I leaned against him. "I'm better than okay," I said honestly. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." And I was.